The clatter of silverware stopped as Ethan stood, pushing his chair back from the crowded diner table. He looked at me, then at my parents. A coldness in his eyes I'd never seen. "She's always got a joke, doesn't she?" he said, his voice flat, "especially about things that don't concern her." He grabbed his coat. "Some things aren't for public consumption, Clara." The silence felt like a physical weight, crushing me under everyone's gaze. My mother's fork hovered midair. The Friday afternoon traffic thinned out somewhere past Joliet. The highway straightened, opening into the wide, flat expanse of central Illinois farmland. Corn stalks, still green and tall, blurred past the windows of the Honda. Clara watched the telephone poles zip by, a steady rhythm against the clear blue sky. Ethan kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, his profile calm as he navigated the familiar route. They had packed a single duffel bag, a quick escape from the city's concrete hum. The thought of her parents' quiet house, a place where time seemed to slow, felt like a promise. Mary and Frank met them on the porch, their smiles easy and wide. Mary, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, embraced Clara tightly, then offered Ethan a firm pat on the shoulder. Frank, stoic as ever, simply nodded, a faint crinkle at the corner of his eyes showing his pleasure. Dinner was a roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans from the garden, a meal Mary had perfected over decades. The conversation flowed easily around the kitchen table, tales of city life mixed with local gossip. Later, the four of them settled around the old dining room table for a game of Scrabble, the plastic tiles clacking softly. Ethan, surprisingly adept, pulled ahead quickly, prompting good-natured groans from the rest. The evening ended with a cup of chamomile tea and early bedtimes, the comfortable quiet of the house a welcome blanket after the week's demands. Saturday morning began with the smell of brewing coffee and the promise of a full Midwestern breakfast. They drove the short distance to the Maple Street Diner, a place Clara had known since childhood. The diner was already bustling, the air thick with the scent of griddle grease and stale coffee. They slid into a booth by the window. Mary and Frank ordered their usual, scrambled eggs and bacon. Ethan, after a moment's deliberation, asked for the big stack 3 large pancakes with a side of sausage. Clara, watching him, nudged his arm playfully. "Going for the gold, are we, big guy?" she said, offering a conspiratorial wink. "Those pants might feel a little snug on the drive home." Ethan offered a tight smile, his eyes briefly meeting hers before he turned to the window. Watching a truck rumble past, the waitress, a woman Clara vaguely remembered from high school, brought their orders. As Ethan reached for the small plastic creamer for his coffee, his fingers slipped, sending the tiny container skittering across the table. It landed with a soft thump on the floor. "Butterfingers," Clara said quickly, a slight laugh in her voice. "Guess those big stacks are already affecting your coordination." Ethan sighed, a subtle sound, and bent to retrieve the creamer. When he straightened, he offered a brief, almost imperceptible eye roll, a familiar gesture that Clara took as a sign of his good humor. His smile, though, seemed to stick on his face a beat too long. After breakfast, they walked through the small town, stopping at the local farmers' market set up in the town square. Baskets of fresh produce, jars of preserves, and handmade crafts lined the temporary stalls. Clara linked her arm through Ethan's, pointing out a particularly large zucchini. She leaned in, her voice a low whisper meant only for him. "Maybe you could slice that up, Ethan," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "For your little problem. You know, good for circulation." Ethan's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching visibly for a second. He just kept walking, his gaze fixed straight ahead. Clara brushed it off, a familiar response, a part of their usual banter. She bought a small jar of apple butter from a woman with kind eyes. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of small talk and errands. Frank showed Ethan his new lawnmower. Mary and Clara discussed recipes. Ethan's contributions to the conversations grew sparse, his answers shorter. He would nod or offer a brief, when addressed directly. Clara noticed the growing quietness. A mild shift in his usual conversational presence. She attributed it to the long drive, or the general slowness of a small-town weekend. Caught up in the comfortable rhythm of family, in her parents' familiar presence, she missed the slight stiffness in Ethan's posture, the way his eyes seemed to hold a distant focus. She remained oblivious to the increasing space opening between them. A quiet, unnoticed signal. Saturday evening, after another of Mary's hearty home-cooked meals, found the four of them in the living room. The fireplace cast a warm, flickering glow across the worn floral rug. Frank, settled deep in his armchair, had launched into a particularly long-winded tale about his fraternity days at Purdue, a story Clara had heard countless times. He detailed some ill-conceived prank involving a rival college mascot and a local dairy farm. The narrative drifted, meandering through irrelevant anecdotes and exaggerated feats of youthful daring. Mary knitted quietly on the sofa beside Clara, her needles clicking a steady rhythm. Clara watched the fire, half listening, half lost in her own thoughts. She glanced at Ethan, who was slumped beside her on the sofa, his head resting against the cushion. His eyes were half closed, and his breathing was slow. Even as Frank reached the climax of his story, the mascot, a stolen pig, covered in green paint, Ethan let out a quiet, stifled yawn, his hand flying to his mouth to cover it. The gesture was fleeting, almost imperceptible in the dim light. But Clara saw it. A familiar impishness bubbled up inside her, a desire to lighten the heavy air, to prod him gently. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to an exaggerated coo, the kind a mother uses with a tired toddler. "Aw, is little Ethan getting sleepy?" she murmured, patting his thigh lightly. "Does little Ethan need his baba and his blankie? Did Frank's big, scary story make him all worn out?" She punctuated her words with a soft, condescending giggle, expecting a good-natured groan or an eye roll. The usual response. Instead, Ethan's eyes snapped open. The dullness was gone, replaced by a sudden, terrifying flash of anger. Raw and immediate, it was a look Clara had never seen on his face, a cold, hard fire that made her stomach clench. He sat bolt upright, the movement sharp and abrupt, as if an electric current had shot through him. The springs of the sofa groaned under the sudden shift. "That's it," Ethan said, his voice low and tight, devoid of any warmth. He pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff. The easygoing slouch of earlier was gone. He stood over her, his shoulders squared. "I've had enough, Clara." The words hung heavy in the air, each one a stone dropping into a still pond. "I'm sick and tired of being the butt of your jokes, every single time. It's not funny anymore. It's just hurtful and disrespectful." He didn't raise his voice, but the quiet intensity of his tone was far more effective than any shout could have been. Clara's mouth fell open. A small, involuntary gasp escaped her. She blinked, her mind struggling to process what was happening. Ethan. Her steady, calm Ethan. The man who laughed off her silliness, who always found humor in their life. This wasn't him. She looked from his rigid face to her parents, who sat frozen, their eyes wide. A sudden, cold fear snaked through her, chilling her from the inside out. "Honey, I was just teasing," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "You know I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, you know how I am." She tried to offer a conciliatory smile, but her lips felt stiff, unnatural. Ethan didn't flinch. He walked over to the coat rack by the front door, pulling his jacket from the hook with a jerky motion. He didn't even glance back at her. "Save it," he said, his back still to her. His voice was flat, final. "I'm going for a drive. Don't wait up." The words were delivered with a chilling absence of emotion, as if he were discussing the weather. He fumbled with the zipper for a second, then yanked the door open. The cold night air rushed into the warm living room, carrying with it the faint scent of damp earth, the sound of his heavy boots on the porch steps, then the distinct click of the car doors, followed by the roar of the engine as he backed out of the driveway. The gravel crunched loudly. Then, a final, definitive slam, as the front door closed behind him. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on Clara. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and Mary's knitting needles, which now lay still in her lap. Mary finally broke the quiet, her voice low and laced with disappointment. "Clara Jean, how could you?" she asked, looking at her daughter with a sorrowful gaze. That was just cruel. Frank, who had watched the entire scene unfold with a grim expression, slowly shook his head. He put his hands on his knees, his eyes fixed on the dying embers in the fireplace. "There's a difference between teasing, Clara," he said, his voice quiet but firm, and tearing someone down. "Ethan's a good man. You crossed a line tonight." His words, calm and measured, hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. A wave of nausea washed over her. She felt a cold, sickening realization begin to sink into her gut, a heavy stone settling deep inside. The comfortable warmth of the room had vanished, replaced by an icy dread. The silence in the living room stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the refrigerator. Frank's quiet words, "You crossed a line," echoed in Clara's ears, sharp and unyielding. She sat there, numb, for what felt like an eternity, the heat from the fireplace doing nothing to thaw the cold dread that had settled in her chest. Then, like a sudden burst of static, fragmented memories began to flood her mind. Not just today's jabs, but years of them. The casual remarks about his receding hairline, a playful swipe at his developing dad bod, the constant teasing about his preference for obscure sci-fi shows over a night out, the gentle mockery of his elaborate, sometimes overly ambitious cooking experiments, each one a tiny needle prick, a harmless joke, a just kidding. She saw them now, not as isolated incidents, but as a relentless, cumulative assault, a slow, steady erosion of his patience, his confidence. The casual flippancy she'd worn like a badge of honor now felt like a brutal weapon. "I have to find him," Clara said, the words a raw whisper. She scrambled off the sofa, grabbing her phone and keys from the small table by the door. Her hands trembled slightly as she fumbled with them. "I need to explain. I need to tell him I'm sorry." She rushed out the door before her parents could respond, the night air a sharp slap to her face. As she pulled out of the driveway, her fingers fumbled with the phone. She hit Ethan's contact. The dial tone, a sterile, mocking sound in the quiet car. It rang twice, then 3 times, before clicking over to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Ethan," his recorded voice said, calm and collected, a stark contrast to the churning panic in her gut. "Please leave a message." She disconnected, her heart sinking. She tried again. Voicemail. Again. Still voicemail. The automated voice, so familiar, now felt like a barrier, a cold steel wall keeping her from him. She drove aimlessly, turning down familiar streets, her eyes scanning for his dark sedan. The small town was mostly dark, storefronts shuttered, houses with only a porch light on. Each turn brought a fresh wave of memory, a new replay of a joke she'd made. "Careful, old man, you're losing your grip," she'd said once, when he dropped a glass. "You know, if you spent less time with those aliens and more time at the gym, you might actually finish that marathon," she'd quipped, laughing when he winced. The words that had felt so innocent, so playful, now tasted like ash in her mouth. She saw them through his eyes, through the lens of Frank's words, tearing someone down. It wasn't banter. It was a constant stream of criticism, thinly veiled as affection. The realization hit her with sickening force. How could she have been so blind, so utterly careless? She pulled into the entrance of Miller's Park, the spot where they used to come on dates, where they'd shared first kisses under the weeping willows. The parking lot was empty, bathed in the pale glow of a single street lamp. "No, Ethan. No," familiar sedan. She cut the engine, plunging the interior of her car into near darkness. The silence of the park pressed in, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the night breeze. Her vision blurred. Tears, hot and heavy, welled up in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Guilt, a sharp, cold knot, tightened in her stomach. Blind, she whispered to the empty car. Careless, so incredibly careless. She sat there for another hour, the cold seeping into her bones, the weight of her mistakes pressing down. Her phone remained silent. Finally, with a heavy sigh, she started the engine. There was nowhere else to look. She headed back to her parents' house. A desperate, fading hope, clinging to the idea that maybe, just maybe, he would be there. The porch light was on. His car was still absent. She let herself in, the click of the lock sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Mary and Frank were still in the living room, exactly where she'd left them, their faces etched with lines of worry, illuminated by the dying embers in the fireplace. They looked up as she entered, their expressions mirroring her own despair. Clara stumbled towards the sofa, collapsing onto it, the strength draining from her legs. Her voice came out as a strangled whisper, cracking under the weight of her fear. "He's not anywhere. I can't find him." She buried her face in her hands. "I can't believe I messed up so badly. What if he doesn't come back?" The question hung in the air, raw and terrifying. Mary moved closer, her hand gently stroking Clara's hair. "He'll come back, honey," she said, her voice soft but steady. "He just needs some time to cool off. Ethan's a good man. He's hurt, that's all. But he'll come around." Her words were meant to comfort, but they felt thin, fragile against the crushing reality of Clara's despair. The long night stretched before Clara like an endless, dark highway. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the leaves outside, sent a jolt of false hope through her. She lay in the familiar childhood bed, staring up at the ceiling, picturing Ethan driving, alone, hurt, somewhere out in the cold. She replayed his angry words, her cruel retort, her parents' disappointed faces. Each memory twisted a fresh knot of anxiety in her stomach. Sleep was a distant, unreachable shore. She drifted in and out of a light, agitated doze, the digital clock on the bedside table glowing a relentless red. 1:47 a.m., then 2:33, then 4:05. Dawn arrived, a pale, anemic light seeping through the curtains. The house was quiet, too quiet. She crept downstairs, the floorboards groaning under her feet. Ethan's car was still absent from the driveway. No note on the kitchen counter, no text message, no missed calls. The cold, hard truth settled over her. This was no ordinary fight. This was something far deeper, far more serious than a Saturday night spat. Throughout Sunday, the despair tightened its grip. Clara couldn't eat, couldn't focus. She sent text after text, each one a desperate plea into the void. "Ethan, please call me back. I'm so sorry. I love you, babe. I'm worried sick." Then, a few hours later, "Where are you? Are you safe? Just tell me you're okay." And later still, "I know I messed up. I know I was wrong. Please just talk to me." The messages piled up, unanswered, unread. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail every single time. His calm, recorded voice a torment. The silence from his end was absolute, unwavering, a stark brick wall she couldn't penetrate. By Sunday evening, Clara was a wreck. Her eyes red and puffy, her voice hoarse from unshed tears and unanswered pleas. Mary watched her with a quiet sadness, finally insisting, "You're not fit to drive, honey. You need to stay another night. We'll figure this out in the morning." Clara nodded, too exhausted to argue, too defeated to protest. Monday morning felt like a funeral. Clara packed her small bag, the weight of her parents' unspoken worry pressing down on her. The drive back to the city was a blur of gray highway and heavier skies. Her apartment, when she unlocked the door, was silent and cold. No sign of Ethan's presence. No indication he had returned. Not even briefly. His toothbrush was gone from the holder, a small detail that felt like a punch to the gut. The air in the apartment felt stale, empty. She called in sick to work, mumbling something about a stomach bug to her boss, a flimsy excuse that barely masked the tremor in her voice. The day passed in a torturous cycle. She would pace the small living room, then collapse onto the sofa, sobbing into a pillow. Then, another desperate attempt to call Ethan, followed by the familiar click to voicemail. She even called a couple of his closest friends, people she knew they socialized with. "Have you heard from Ethan?" she'd ask, trying to keep her voice even. He left my parents' house last night, and I haven't been able to reach him." Their hesitant, slightly uncomfortable responses confirmed they hadn't seen him, or at least, weren't telling her if they had. Late that afternoon, as the shadows lengthened and the apartment grew dimmer, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from an unknown number. Her heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled to open it, her hands shaking. The words on the screen were stark, chillingly formal. "This is Ethan. I'm staying with a friend for now. I need some time and space to think. Please don't try to contact me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready." Her heart sank, a cold, heavy stone dropping into an empty well. The casualness, the absolute finality of his words, hit her with a physical blow. "This was bad," she whispered to the empty room. "Really bad. This wasn't just a cooling-off period. This was a withdrawal, a deliberate severing of contact." The next few weeks blurred into a miserable, regret-filled haze. Every waking moment was consumed by thoughts of Ethan, their fractured relationship, and the terrifying realization that her marriage, once so solid, was imploding. The silence from his end became a constant, throbbing ache. The weeks that followed Ethan's text message were a blur of restless nights and hollow days. Clara found herself caught in a desperate cycle, trying every avenue she could think of to reach him. She drafted long, heartfelt emails, pouring out her apologies, detailing her profound regret, and promising a radical change in her behavior. She sent them, one after another, into the digital void, hoping against hope that he would read them, that something would penetrate the wall he had erected. She even wrote handwritten letters, a more personal touch, detailing specific instances where she'd been cruel, acknowledging the pain she'd inflicted. Each envelope sealed with a desperate prayer. One Tuesday, fueled by a surge of desperate energy, she drove to his office building. She walked past the security desk, her heart pounding, and took the elevator up to his floor. His assistant, a polite woman named Brenda, looked up, a knowing sadness in her eyes. "He's not in today, Clara," she said softly, before Clara even had a chance to ask. "He's working remotely for a while." The finality in her tone, the gentle dismissal, felt like another door closing. Then, nearly a month to the day after his initial text, her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She snatched it up, her breath catching in her throat. "I think we need to talk," the message read. It was Ethan. "Meet me at Café Luna tomorrow at 2 p.m. A painful cocktail of hope and dread churned in Clara's stomach. Hope, because he was finally willing to talk. Dread, because she knew, deep down, that this conversation wouldn't be easy. The next morning dragged on, each minute an eternity. She picked out her clothes carefully, tried to tame her hair, rehearsed apologies in front of the bathroom mirror. At 1:30, she was already at Café Luna, settling into a small, out-of-the-way table by the window. She ordered a black coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she lifted the cup to her lips. She watched the street, her eyes darting to every car, every pedestrian. At precisely 2:03, he walked in. The bell above the door chimed softly. Ethan. He looked thinner, his face a little more gaunt, lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. He wore a simple gray sweater, his shoulders slightly slumped. His usually meticulous hair was a little disheveled. He looked tired and drawn, and the sight of him hit Clara with an unexpected force, making her breath catch in her throat. The man she loved, ravaged by her unkindness. He spotted her and walked over, his movements slow and deliberate. There was no warmth in his eyes, no flicker of recognition that they were anything more than strangers meeting for a somber appointment. "Hi," Clara managed, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the roar of anxiety in her head. "Hi, Clara," Ethan replied, his tone neutral, flat. He pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down. He didn't offer a smile, didn't reach for her hand. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, punctuated only by the clatter of plates from the counter and the low murmur of other conversations. They both started to speak at the same time, an awkward synchronicity. "Ethan, I'm so sorry," Clara began, her voice cracking. "Clara, I've been thinking," Ethan interjected, then stopped, gesturing for her to continue. "No, you first," she insisted, swallowing hard. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling slowly. His gaze was fixed somewhere over her shoulder, on the bustling street outside. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching these past few weeks, Clara," he began, his voice low and steady, devoid of emotion, like a doctor delivering a difficult diagnosis, and I've come to a very difficult conclusion. He paused, and Clara's heart began to hammer against her ribs. She braced herself. I can't go on like this anymore. Your constant belittling and mockery. It's taken a serious toll on me. He finally met her eyes, and the pain in them was almost unbearable to see. I've lost all sense of self-worth and confidence. I don't want to live my life walking on eggshells, constantly waiting for the next joke, the next jab, the next time you'll cut me down in front of other people. Or just when it's the two of us. Clara's eyes welled up. Tears streamed down her face, hot and fast. No, Ethan, please. She choked out, her voice raw with desperation. Please don't say that. I can change. I promise I can change. We can go to counseling. We can do anything. Please, just don't give up on us. I love you. She reached across the table, her hand hovering, wanting to touch him, to reassure him, but he pulled back almost imperceptibly, his expression unchanging. His resolve felt like a physical wall between them. This is a crossroads. How these costly choices unfold will shape their future forever. Stick around to the end, to see how life's costly choices unfold. Clara's pleas hung in the air, thick with desperation and the scent of bitter coffee. Ethan slowly shook his head, his gaze still distant. I'm sorry, Clara, he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a deep, weary sadness. But I think it's too late for that. The damage has been done. His words were delivered with a quiet certainty, not anger, but a profound, unchangeable truth. He finally looked at her directly, and in his eyes, Clara saw not hatred, but an overwhelming exhaustion. I need to heal, Clara, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to rebuild my self-esteem, find my footing again. And I can't do that with you. Not right now. Maybe not ever. The word hung in the air, unspoken but clearly understood, a heavy, invisible presence between them. Then, Ethan spoke it. I think we should get a divorce. The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Her lungs seized, unable to draw air. Divorce. It wasn't just a word. It was an amputation, a violent severing of everything they were. Everything they had built. Their college sweetheart days, the long nights studying together, the nervous excitement of their wedding, 7 years of shared jokes, shared dreams, a future they had meticulously planned, all of it dissolving, crumbling to dust. Her mind reeled, trying to grasp the enormity of it, but her thoughts were a frantic, disorganized mess. No, she whispered, a strangled sound that barely escaped her throat. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless. No, Ethan, please. We can fix this. We can. I know we can. I love you so much. I'll do anything. Please. Just tell me what to do. Her voice was ragged, raw with a fear she hadn't known she possessed. She reached across the table again, this time closing her fingers over his arm. His skin felt cold, unresponsive. Ethan gently pulled his arm away. His own eyes, she noticed, were glistening, reflecting the cafe's soft lights. A single tear traced a path down his cheek, quickly wiped away with the back of his hand. I'm sorry, Clara, he repeated, his voice thick with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher. Grief, perhaps. Or regret. I truly believe this is for the best. For both of us. He took another deep breath, his resolve hardening. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I've started the paperwork. He paused, as if bracing himself for her reaction. I'm hoping we can make this as amicable as possible. Clara stared at him, unable to comprehend. Lawyer. Paperwork. Amicable. The words swirled around her. Meaningless. Abstract. She felt like she was drowning, submerged in a cold, dark water, gasping for air that wouldn't come. This wasn't real. This was a nightmare, a terrible, vivid dream she would soon wake from. But the smell of coffee, the quiet clatter of the cafe, the resolute set of Ethan's jaw, it was all too real. No, she pleaded again, A last, desperate gasp. Just give us time. A trial separation. I'll stay with Beth for a while. You can have the apartment. Just time, Ethan. Please. He sighed heavily, a sound of profound weariness that settled deep in Clara's bones. I don't think that will change anything, Clara. My mind is made up. His eyes, though still sad, were unwavering. The crushing weight of her actions, the full, devastating reality of her carelessness, slammed into her. The jokes, the teasing, the casual cruelty, each one a chisel chip, slowly but surely dismantling the foundation of their life. Oh God, she moaned, the words barely audible. What have I done? I've ruined everything. For a moment, Ethan reached across the table, his hand briefly touching her arm, a fleeting gesture of something akin to pity or perhaps shared sorrow. It's not all on you, Clara, he said, his voice a little softer, a glimmer of the old Ethan in his tone. We both played a part in this. I should have spoken up sooner. Should have told you how much it was hurting me. He paused, his gaze drifting to the window. But what's done is done. We need to accept that our marriage is over, and try to move forward as best we can. Clara looked up, through tear-blurred eyes, searching his face, searching for a flicker of doubt, a shred of hope, anything that wasn't this cold, unbearable truth. But there was nothing, only the quiet, resolute finality of a man who had made up his mind. Conclusion. The cafe slowly emptied around them, the afternoon light fading to a pale gray. Clara sat there, numb, the echoes of Ethan's words reverberating in the hollow space where her future used to be. The weight of her harmless jokes had not just broken a man's spirit, but irrevocably shattered the life they had built. There would be no second chances, no counseling sessions, no gentle reconciliation, just the stark, brutal end of a chapter, leaving her alone with the consequences of her own making. The silence from Ethan was now a permanent fixture, a testament to the price of unspoken pain and unchecked words. She had learned a lesson. Agonizingly. Tragically. But too late to save what mattered most. The cafe slowly emptied around them, the afternoon light fading to a pale gray. Clara sat there, numb, the echoes of Ethan's words reverberating in the hollow space where her future used to be. The weight of her harmless jokes had not just broken a man's spirit, but irrevocably shattered the life they had built. There would be no second chances, no counseling sessions, no gentle reconciliation. Just the stark, brutal end of a chapter, leaving her alone with the consequences of her own making. The silence from Ethan was now a permanent fixture, a testament to the price of unspoken pain and unchecked words. She had learned a lesson, agonizingly, tragically, but too late to save what mattered most.